Thank you, Nancy. Thanks everybody for being here tonight. Well, her name was Lois. And she would tell anybody who would listen that she was born on the most powerful day of the year, March 4th. Of course, March 4th, 1891 was when she was born. Her name was Lois Burnham. Lois was the daughter of a doctor, Dr. Clark Burnham, and Matilda, his wife, had 6 children. Lois was born in Brooklyn Heights, New York. To hear Lois tell it, we had an idyllic childhood. Our parents were always busy at church, and it really made an impression on me to watch my father give medical assistance for people who couldn't afford care. She also learned from that faith community that her prime purpose in life was to be of use to the world. Be of use. That message always rang with Lois. And being the oldest of 6, she always seemed to kind of gather people together and to sort of pay special attention to people with special needs who were struggling. Well, the family would spend their summers in Vermont, where her father would offer medical care to vacationers. And they crossed paths with a lot of prominent people there in Vermont when they summered. For example, some of their playmates were the children of Robert Todd Lincoln. So that means they were playing with the grandchildren of Abraham Lincoln. All that made quite an impression on Lois as she grew up. We were taught culture and art and music and literature and education, she would go on to say. She went to Packer Collegiate Institute with an emphasis in fine arts. She could draw and sing and play the piano, and she spent many of her years as an interior decorator. Well, in 1913, her brother, Roger, one of her brothers, brought home a friend named William, or Bill. Bill was a little bit shy, and sometimes he had some bouts with a little anxiety and depression, but he always made Lois laugh and smile. And he was a full 4 years younger than Lois. They were friends for a few years, but it really wasn't that long before they became romantically involved. Within a year, they were engaged. Lois had already graduated from college, but when Lois was 27 in 1918, Lois and Bill were married. And it was not long after that, Bill was shipped out to serve with an artillery unit in World War I in Europe. Well, when Bill came back, he hadn't seen a significant amount of combat action. Bill came home and they began to settle into their home life together. After that post-war era, such optimism and the future was looking so bright for the couple. Bill had secured a fantastic job in finance with a surety company. They had an elegant apartment on the east side, on the far side of the East River, with a great view of the skyrocketing skyline of Manhattan. Things were going very well for them as they got off and started their life together. Well, Lois had several ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages. And they wanted desperately to start a family, but the doctors had advised it was too dangerous and too difficult for her to carry a child to term. And another challenging development began to be evident. Bill was beginning to drink a lot. Lois would go on to write later, Bill, it seemed that when he would start to drink that he couldn't stop. Bill would drink one drink after another until he was too drunk to pick up the next drink. I was concerned, of course, but I thought that our life together, our marriage would provide such completeness and such happiness that he wouldn't need the liquor anymore. Well, those are common thoughts for people who become involved and work to build a life with someone who may live with what we now call an alcohol use disorder. In that post World War I era, it was simply "you're an alcoholic" was the term used. Bill, of course, didn't see a problem at all, which is also common in that sort of situation. Lois was the one working to pay the bills. Lois worked at the YMCA. She would piece jobs together to try to provide some stability. She worked at the YMCA. She spent some time as a teacher. She was the one carrying all the weight of responsibility for the home, paying the bills, trying to keep the household running, and even just keeping a roof over their heads. Her father had allowed them to live on some rental property, but they had even used up that welcome. "We were living isolated," she said. "We were isolated for our friends had dropped us or we had dropped our friends. We seldom saw our families. It occurred to me that since I had no children, my one purpose in life, my way of being of use to the world, would be to help Bill get sober." And so Lois set out to do that in every way she possibly knew how. But nothing seemed to work. Bill's drinking just seemed to get worse. He began coming into work late. And then he would insult clients and he would leave work early to start drinking. He would even be gone for days at a time and not tell Lois where he was. Lois said, "He even began to sell all of our furnishings in the house to pay for liquor, including my piano." It was so difficult. Nothing seemed to change. They finally began to work together. Bill saw there was a problem after he lost several jobs. So they began to sort of form a team. Bill worked on trying to find answers by reading books on religion and philosophy. Lois would try to manage the finances and figure out how to take months off at a time so they could spend time in a country setting to renew and revive their relationship together. Occasionally, Bill would string together a few days or weeks of sobriety, but nothing really seemed to provide any kind of lasting relief for this consistent hold alcohol had on him. Nothing seemed to work. And in those days, no one had anything that seemed to be able to help people who had an alcohol use disorder. They tried signing abstinence pledges, and those sorts of approaches didn't seem to help people. One night in late 1934, a friend visited Bill in their home. It was a friend from their days, a childhood friend from their days in Vermont that he and Lois both knew. And both he and Lois, both Bill and Lois, regarded the friend as what they would call at that time a hopeless drunkard. Their friend never seemed to be able to quit drinking. Only this time his friend appeared with clear eyes and a brightness and enthusiasm and encouragement and optimism. And he declared, Bill, I got religion and now I don't feel this urge to drink." Bill was intrigued. He'd never seen his friend like this before. It fascinated him so not much that within a few days, Bill checked himself into the town's hospital in New York to clear his thinking. And while he was there in December of 1934, Bill himself had a spiritual awakening. And that's a story in and of itself. But Bill left town's hospital a transformed man. He never had another drink the rest of his life. Bill quickly found that the quickest way to make his way of living a new life and commitment to his recovery and his sobriety stronger was to help other people. So, as he called it, again in the terminology of the day, one drunk helping another drunk. So, Bill set about, he was always about, and as Lois would say, Bill was always out. He was hardly ever home, or the phone was ringing all hours of the night. He was either scouting out new drunks or working with the old drunks. Then in 1935, Bill had a fortuitous meeting when he was on a business trip to Akron, Ohio, and he met a man named Bob. And Bob also had a horrible drinking problem that was destroying his life and his medical practice and his marriage. Bill offered what he knew about what he had found to help him be sober. And within a few days, the approach that Bill shared helped Bob also become sober. Well, Bill went on, they figured out that they had sort of made this spiritual leap, had a spiritual transformation or awakening, and trying to figure out how could we help other people? How could we create a path for other people to follow? Some people, wake up quickly all at once, and some people wake up very slowly. But how could we point people to a way to go through the same process we did? So Bill worked, and he finally broke the whole process over several years down into smaller increments or spiritual principles or steps, and finally formed 12 of those steps that individuals could take and follow to have a spiritual awakening as a process, bit by bit, to change their lives and change their behavior, which could help free them from the need to drink. Well, Bill was Bill Wilson, and his friend was Dr. Bob Smith, and both together worked to form the organization we now know as Alcoholics Anonymous. And in 1939, the big book of AA, which really catapulted the organization into prominence and now reaches millions of people and offers support across the globe. Well, there was a time of great excitement and joy and gratitude in the Wilson household. Bill had found his path to freedom. However, oddly, that did not produce the same result for Lois. Lois found herself in a stew of resentment and anger. It took her years to figure out what really was happening, and she would say, I found myself so isolated. In our living room, every night was a circle of men. Our whole apartment always smelled like cigarette smoke and coffee. And often they would bring family members with them night after night. Bill was transformed, all right, but not into the doting husband I was hoping he would be. He was gone all the time. I was isolated. I was still the one working, paying bills, shouldering the responsibility for keeping a roof over our heads and food in the pantry. And to make matters worse, the one purpose I had in life, to get Bill sober, to be of use to the world, had now vanished. And I had really nothing to do with pointing him in the right direction and finding the answer. Bill had found his path to freedom. I needed to find mine. And I found it one night, but it started out in the form of the opening thing that, well, the situation that opened my eyes came in the form of a shoe. Bill innocently one night asked me, are you ready to go to a meeting? I had had it. I astonished him and me when I picked up a shoe and threw it at him as hard as I could and hollered, damn you and your old meetings. As I watched that shoe sail across the room, I realized I needed some help. Bill ducked, by the way. Lois had to find her own path to freedom, to deal with all that resentment and anger and churning residual from alcohol, what alcohol had done to their relationships. Bill and Lois were both firmly committed to believing that alcohol use disorder was sort of what they called an allergy of the body. Lois often said, "You wouldn't walk out on your husband if he had cancer or heart disease, would you?" She was committed to stay. And Lois, in realizing she needed to deal with her own issues and find her own path to freedom, wondered where she would find that help. And oddly, she looked at those 12 steps that Bill had created. Step one, admitted we were powerless over alcohol and our lives had become unmanageable. Well, said Lois, my life was not, I didn't have any control. I mean, I had no problem with alcohol. I didn't drink. But then I realized I had no control over whether alcohol went in somebody else's mouth. I had to accept I had no control. And my life had indeed become unmanageable as I tried to deal with all these parts of me that were churning and boiling. Step two, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Well, I didn't consider myself needing to be restored to sanity, but then it occurred to me that anyone who would throw a shoe at the person she loved most in the world was not exactly the pinnacle of sound thinking. And obviously, I hadn't been able to manage it myself. So there must be something outside of myself that might offer assistance. Lois went on to use those same 12 steps. She asked for help with her friend, a neighbor named Anne, and together they formed an organization we now know as Al Anon. Al Anon in 1958 became a more official organization. Now it has 124,000 groups in the United States and 118 countries. Al-Anon is still one of the few practical groups and sources of coping skills for family members and loved ones and friends of people who have substance use disorders. AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, was the great granddaddy of all 12-step groups. But Al-Anon was the second one and offers help to family members. Bill and Lois found their freedom. And Bill wrote in the 12 steps and the 12 promises of AA, we are going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past, nor will we close the door on it. And in One Day at a Time in Al-Anon, Lois wrote, we are imprisoned by our own inability or unwillingness to reach out for help. I will set myself free from a prison of self-will and pride, which I myself have built. I will accept freedom. Bill Wilson died in 1971. His wife, who was of great use to this world, passed away in 1988. And her name was Lois.